Social changes and effects of the early modern century.
You had the whole period to take the test, but yet you're not done.
I guess I'll fill it out now.
No.
Oh, hi. I'm your conscience, and I'm going to be the reason why you passed this test. So let's get on with the show. Okay, anyways, along the lines of the 14th century, there was a decrease in temperatures. This is often referred as the Little Ice Age. In this time, agricultural tools advanced in the northern hemisphere. There was an increase for peasant slavery and plantations. They needed more raw materials that they could produce in the Americas and in South America and the new Americas in the New World. They needed the motherland needed new things for the colonies so they can increase in their civilizations. In this time, Christopher Columbus started all this with the Columbian Exchange in 1492. He was funded by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella from Spain. He was sent by the Spaniards because they just cut off their Muslims. They just sent them out and put them in another kingdom. And so they're looking for a new way to trade with Asia because they don't want to deal with the Muslims at all, because they don't want to deal with mean people, because, oh, you just kicked my people out, so we're not going to trade with you. So they don't want to deal with that at all. So they go and they try to find a new route to Asia, but then they landed on this continent, and then that's where we got started in this place, the early modern era. But in this time, there was India with Vasco da Gama that paved the way to setting up trade posts in India. Also in Brazil, they became the new sugar people. They took over the sugar trade because Brazil was very dense, has lots of weather that, as you can tell now, that can support sugar, and it can grow a lot, even though it's like, anyways, so they became the main people in the sugar trade to trade with everybody. But in this time, to contrary to belief, 80% of African Americans moved over to Brazil and not to Americas. And most of the African slaves went to Brazil to produce sugar, because sugar was a necessity at the time. It wasn't just something that, oh, I can live without sugar. It was just everybody needed sugar, so they sent most of the slaves there so they can make more plantations and they can make more sugar to produce out there, since everybody wanted or needed it, except for China, obviously. And then this type of slavery, it was called chattel slavery, and that's it. On to the next part. Yeah. Okay. Maybe I'll say it later.
The Portuguese traded guns and alcohol for slaves in Africa. This is what also contributed to the Atlantic slave trade. It was the first Portuguese plantation in Brazil.
A man named Martin Luther wrote a book criticizing the Catholic Church, and due to the invention of printing press, the book was read out throughout Europe, causing people to create new branches of Christian churches.
Okay, so starting off, the Age of Enlightenment was a time with aka philosopher, tree huggers, and religious people realized things about life. And by the way, this is a really ugly tree. Okay, so Martin Luther was one of the first people. He disliked how popes lived in grand luxury, didn't like corruption, and he thought salvation came from believing in God. Next is probably going to be Mary Wollstonecraft. She was the first feminist, and she thought we raised our children to be tyrants and believed in human rights. Also, John Locke believed in studying humans. In South America, there was a making of wine in the year 1659 that helped people, importantly monks and early settlers in Argentina, developed upon new innovations and used their skills. For example, to channel irrigation water to vineyards. In the centuries that followed, Argentina's success in winemaking was continued with new settlers with foreign expertise, notably Italian and German immigrants. This video from 12 Years a Slave is relatable because it shows the growth of the plantation economy, because during this time it increased the demand for slaves in the America, and they had a form of coerced labor, and coerced labor meant that you didn't have a choice. In this new colonizing, there was Hernan Cortez that conquered the Aztecs by having advanced weaponry, American allies, and smallpox. Also, slavery in Africa has existed throughout the continent for many centuries and still continues in the current day in some countries. This is when the African diaspora in the 15 to 1800 was commonly used to describe the dispersion of people from Africa during the transatlantic slave trade. Next on our list of topics is the Dutch and English, because they were both highly competitive when it came to monopolizing spices in the East. This is why both settled in different parts of Indo-Asia to establish their own trading post-empires. The English settled in India. During this time, the government granted them trading monopolies. They also stated that they had the right to govern conquered people and start wars. When the Arab slave trade and Atlantic slave trade began, many of the local slave systems changed and began supplying captives for slaves markets outside of Africa. This led to the growth of plantations of all sorts of materials such as sugar, cotton, silk, and many more. Because of the increase in their economies in the Americas, Europe, and China, there was the demand of more slaves. In 1539, England was done with making deals with Charles V and Francis I from France with the Treaty of Toledo, stating that they wouldn't make any more alliances with the English.
While the colonial countries in America demanded for coerced labor, the Spanish made the encomienda system that was given to the Spanish settlers that gives them the right to obtain labor or tribute payment from Native Americans in their encomendero or district. Spain, and strictly speaking, encomienda was not slavery, but in practice it came close. Even with the conflicts there between and Portugal, they made the Treaty of Tordesillas that stopped disputed lands. The chattel slavery is the main one people think of because they are mainly thinking about the United States before the Civil War. There was also the Chinese wanting silver because they needed a currency. Merchants wrote that silver traveled pretty much all across the world before it made its way to China through trade, where it stayed. Silver started transforming populations. The desire for the product moved masses across the globe. This good brought high levels of luxury to people and is still considered of value even today.
Ichi, ni, san, yon, go.
Ohio, Eyoga, Imatashka.
Roku, nana, hachi. Kyuju.
The Mongols are coming! The Mongols are coming! Run! You better watch out. You better go hide. I'm telling you now, so you better stay alive. The Black Death should be coming tonight. Oh, hi. Didn't see you there. Just kidding, I really did see you there. I just wanted to do the stereotypical video introduction for your entertainment, of course. Speaking of entertainment, let's get started, shall we? The higher class became even higher, while the lower started to go even lower. Serfdom. Now I know what you're thinking. Isn't the word serfdom referencing off of surfboards? Why no, my fellow friend. The word serfdom is a legal and economic system which started to exist in central and southern areas of the Russian Empire. And the serfs, not the surfers, but the serfs, were the unfree peasants of the Russian Empire. But then came the European serfs that worked under anyone just to get protection, though they were treated like slaves. Russia even had a list of who was higher than who on the social class, and it was called the Table of Ranks. There was contribution of new economic and political elites led to be the Manchus in China, Creole elites in Spanish America, European gentry, and urban commercial entrepreneurs in great port cities in the world. Man, that's a good cup of joe. I have no Wi-Fi. Okay. In India, typically hereditarily, zamindars, an aristocrat similar to a lord of the manor or a baron, held enormous tracts of land and control over their peasants, from whom they reserved the right to collect tax on behalf of imperial courts or for military purposes. The term means landowner in Persian. There was also Akbar, the most illustrious sultan of the Mughal Empire in India. He expanded the empire and pursued a policy of conciliation with Hindus. Soon after the Manchus in China, or the red-tasseled Manchus, the Chinese were impressed and presumed the Manchus and their culture was better than what they possessed. So basically the Manchus were a better fit for what the Chinese had. According to the Creole elites, they viewed their social class as a means of having a European descent birthed in a Latin American colony. These major elites were the ones to greatly lead revolutions towards their enemies. Now, leading on to the European gentry. The European gentry refers to be known as a high social class that compromises with people that are well attached to landed estates, higher rankings of the clergy, and families that are considered to be gentle, since they never reach the authority of bearing a coat of arms. Lastly, the urban entrepreneurs were majorly valuable commercial ports that resigned in trade monopoly for the influential imperial states. The ports increased trans-regional trade and global trade were networks, as well as the diffusion of religion. The power of existing political and economic elites fluctuated as they confronted new challenges to their ability to affect the policies of the increasingly powerful monarchs and leaders. Around the 16th century, there was an increase of female rulers, such as Mary Queen Scots of Catherine de' Medici, region of France. The women rulers were more respected due to their uprightness. However, they were still considered as property towards their husbands. Thank you for joining me.
Some new ethnic and racial classifications were made in the Americas. There was the Mestizo, which was Spain and America. There was the Mulatto, which was black and white descent. And then there was the Creole, which was European and black descent. Well, I suggest that you really need to wake up from your nap.